For my thoughts on all the latest happenings in the NFL in a completely relaxed, unscripted format, be sure to check out my channel, JG9 News. And now, on with our feature presentation. I don't know if you guys know this, but in 1996, the New Orleans Saints were not a good football team. In fact, they were quite bad. In the words of their head coach, Jim Mora, they couldn't do diddly-poo. I talked about how bad they were in a previous video of mine before, so if you want to learn more about that, you can do so by clicking the card in the upper right corner. However, everything about this season for the Saints was ugly with a capital U. They ended the year 3-13, which was their worst record since 1980, when they went 1-15. If it wasn't for the New York Jets, the Saints would have had the worst record in football in 1996. They ended the year with just 229 points scored, which was the second worst offense in football, only 8 points better than the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. And they were so bad that they only scored more than 17 points in a game twice, and only scored more than 20 points in a game once. They started the season 0-5, and never were able to recover and bounce back from that. The Saints had rarely been bad over the last decade and a half. At worst, they were below average. In 1996, though, yeah, they were legitimately awful. For the legendary head coach Jim Mora, who guided the team to unprecedented levels of success for most of the past decade, it was an incredibly terrible and putrid end to his Saints coaching career. And the incident involving this man right here truly symbolizes just how bad the Saints were in 1996, and how poorly run the organization was. Because this man right here is running back Ray Zellars. Even though he was a second-round pick, and the Saints had high hopes for him, odds are, unless you're a Notre Dame fan, or unless you are a diehard Saints fan who grew up in that era, this might be the first time you're ever hearing of him. He didn't do a whole lot in his NFL career, because Zellars might be best known today, not for any game that he played, but rather for the game that he didn't play, because he got suspended for the dumbest reason possible by Jim Mora. Imagine the doctors telling you that you can't do something, so you don't do it, and your coach suspends you for it, all while the coach has knowledge of this, and all while your father might be dying. It seems insane. It seems heartless. It seems completely ridiculous and out of line for a head coach to do that. But in 1996, that's exactly what Jim Mora did to Ray Zellars, and we're going to take a deep dive into that controversy today. Because this is the story behind what might just be, considering the circumstances and considering everything that was going on, the dumbest suspension in the near 60-year history of the New Orleans Saints franchise. Before I talk about the actual suspension in question, we need some context to understand just who this man right here, Ray Zellars, is, and what he was going through both on and off the field prior to whatever the heck took place with Jim Mora. In the second round of the 1995 NFL Draft, the Saints decided to upgrade a running game that ranked just 26th in the league out of 28 teams the year before. And they did it by taking this man right here, Notre Dame running back and fullback Ray Zellars, with the 44th pick in the draft. Zellars didn't do a whole lot during that 1995 campaign as a rookie. He rarely touched the ball and only found the end zone twice. However, in 1996, it seemed like early on, the tide was beginning to turn, and he was starting to find himself more involved in the offense. In Week 3, during a game against the Cincinnati Bengals, he scored a rushing touchdown during the team's 30-15 defeat. And in Week 4, after taking over the starting job from Mario Bates, he had a career-high 4.75 yards per carry, having 12 carries for 57 yards, even if he did have a costly fumble in the red zone. Was it second-round production by any means? Not in the slightest bit. But at least it seemed like the Saints had a plan to give Zellars the rock and make him a part of the offense, even if the offense was extremely anemic in just about every aspect imaginable. However, if you thought that he was going to play a part in the Saints' next game, a 17-10 loss in Week 5 to the Baltimore Ravens, think again. Because during that game against the Cardinals, he suffered a rib injury. In fact, as a later diagnosis would say, he suffered not one, not two, but 3 broken ribs. he already had problems with his ribs in the past, having broken a rib during a preseason game against the Minnesota Vikings, and having missed the first 2 weeks of the season with rib issues. But now, the problem was bad enough where he was once again on the injury report. Zellars was listed as questionable throughout the week, and eventually was held out. However, there was the expectation and the belief that even though Zellars couldn't go for the Ravens game, that he was feeling somewhat better the day after, and would be ready to go for Week 6, when the Saints had a game against the Jacksonville Jaguars. Zellars was on the injury report for that week, but instead of being listed as questionable, he was listed as probable. So all systems seemed to be good to go for Zellars, despite 3 broken ribs, to play against the Jags. So much for that, though, because of whatever the heck Mora decided to do next. On the afternoon of Thursday, October 3rd, just 72 hours before the game, the Saints held practice, and Zellars was a participant. However, before the practice, he let the coaching staff know that he would not be able to practice at fullback. It was the advice of the team doctors and was a precautionary measure. Zellars would be able to practice as a running back, but not as a fullback, which makes tons of sense when you think about it. When you're practicing at running back, you're not getting tackled, and you're not getting hit on every play. When you're practicing at fullback, you're going to be involved in a lot of blocking plays. You're going to take a shot on every play, and those shots come in the chest. Zellars spoke with the coaching staff and running backs coach Dave Atkins that because practicing at fullback meant that he'd have to take shots to the rib cage, which, may I remind you, was a rib cage that had 3 of its ribs broken, that he could not go at fullback during this practice session. There's nothing unreasonable about this whatsoever. This is the doctors saying, you can't do this, and Zellars telling the coaching staff, the doctors said I can't do this. And to start practice off, everything was going alright. There were 15 minutes left in the practice session, and Zellars was looking good and was playing running back as instructed. But then, Jim Mora decided that this was a good time to try plays down by the goal line and practice that set. You want to practice your goal line offense in short yard situations, especially because the Saints were not that good at that. They scored just 3 points on 2 opportunities in the red zone in their last game against the Ravens, and the final 2 offensive plays of the game for the Saints were when they had 3rd and 1 and 4th and 1 late in the fourth quarter, looking to drive down the field and cut into the 7-point deficit and tie the ball game up. And they walked away from that with 0 points and 0 first downs. And Moore decided that the recommendation of the doctors, the things that were explicitly told to him, they were complete nonsense. Ray Zellars, get out there at fullback. You're practicing at this position. Now, this is also a good time to bring up that Zellars already wasn't in the best headspace, and it wasn't just because of the rib injury and the 0-5 record. He was dealing with some personal, off-the-field matters involving his father. You see, 2 weeks before, his father came to watch him play against the Arizona Cardinals. However, after the game, football was the furthest thing from his mind. Because one day after the Saints-Cardinals game, Zellars' dad collapsed and was hospitalized due to high blood pressure. And this wasn't a simple in-and-out visit to the hospital. His father was in the hospital for over a week before he was released, and was still in the hospital as of this practice. There were serious questions of whether he was going to make it out alive. So that gives some context as to the headspace that Zellars was in. The team was losing, his dad was in danger of dying, he had 3 broken ribs, and now he was being commanded by Mora to do something that he explicitly said beforehand he could not do. And that's when Zellars completely lost it. Zellars told Mora that he couldn't go out there, because the doctors told him that he couldn't do it. And when Zellars said that, Mora questioned his toughness and told him, screw the doctors, get out there. And when Zellars responded with a profane statement, Mora ordered him off the field, lambasted him in front of the team, and decided to suspend him for the game against the Jags. Mora said that he had never had a player curse at him before, saying, to be honest with you, I kinda egged him on. And Mora took no responsibility, saying that Zellars was the one at fault. So that makes complete sense. Zellars had never done anything like this before when he lashed out at Mora. He said things in the heat of the moment because of literally everything happening in his life, and he gets suspended as a result for something that is quite clearly not his fault. Said his agent, Greg Johnson, "From talking to Ray, there's a lot going on now. He's not used to losing as much as he's losing. He said the team is a much better team than what their record stands for." He apologized, and he obviously said some things he normally wouldn't say. Now look, I'm not saying that Zellars was this clean person who was super easy to get along with from a coaching standpoint. He had his moments. In 1995, when he was at Notre Dame and playing in his final collegiate game ever, a loss to Colorado in the Fiesta Bowl during the 1994 season, he didn't start the game because of what was only described as a coach's decision on the part of Lou Holtz, even though he came off the bench and played a lot. And earlier in the 1996 season, during training camp, Mora criticized Zellars and his lack of toughness. So this is not saying that Zellars was the perfect teammate in the slightest bit. Then again, I'm not sure if Mora's word meant anything, because he said the same thing about the other running back, Mario Bates. But when you've got a guy with 3 broken ribs who is being held out by the doctors, and the coaching staff knows about this, and you decide to put him in a position where he's vulnerable, and where it's ill-advised that he goes out there, and then you criticize his toughness in front of the whole team and egg him on for following doctor's orders, all while his father is dying in the hospital? Yeah, you can see why this is incredibly stupid, and why the Saints were not good in 1996, and why Jim Mora was a bad head coach by this point, whose time with the team had run out, right? Literally everything that Mora did here was uncalled for and was wrong. I know Mora said that this was entirely the fault of Zellars, and we don't exactly know what Zellars said during the profanity portion, but come on. Based on all the evidence and all the reports from eyewitnesses there, I don't know how you can possibly blame Zellars for this. I really don't. Now, the odd part about all of this is that Ray Zellars, who played for this team behind me right here, came off of that suspension and had not just the best game of his career, but maybe one of the greatest games by any Saints running back ever. I can't say it's number one because of what Alvin Kamara did on Christmas in 2020 against the Minnesota Vikings, but it's top 5. It's definitely in the conversation for top 5 games all time by a Saints running back. For the first and only time all season, the Saints scored more than 20 points in a game, as they put up 27 points in a shocking win against the Chicago Bears. And in that game, Zellars had 174 rushing yards on 8.7 yards per carry. He was an absolute menace. It was the best game of his career, one of the best games by any Saints running back ever, and it came off the heels of one of the strangest and stupidest suspensions of all time. Go figure. I don't think there were any hard feelings regarding Zellars and Mora after that game against the Bears, and after Zellars' father was released from the hospital. Zellars was upset when Mora announced his resignation from the team just 2 weeks after the practice incident, saying, "I'm really sorry it turned out this way. I don't know what to say. No one had any insight into this." That doesn't sound like a man who was joyous about Mora stepping down from his post. That seems like a man who was shocked and disappointed about the revelation. So he let bygones be bygones. It was water under the bridge. Zellars would last in the NFL until 1998, playing his entire 4-year career with the Saints. And when you're a second-round pick who only plays 4 years and has just over 1,300 rushing yards, it's not great by any means. Then again, no running back taken in the second round of the draft that year did much of anything, as neither Sherman Williams on the Dallas Cowboys with pick number 46, nor Terrell Fletcher on the San Diego Chargers with pick number 51 had a career to write home about. Still, today, Zellars is best known for the game he didn't play in, when Jim Mora decides to suspend him for non-compliance, even though he was complying with the orders of the doctors, even though the coaching staff was more than aware and knowledgeable of the situation, even though Mora egged Zellars on by his own admission, and even though Zellars was going through some major personal stuff. Because back in 1996, when this news dropped, and even 3 decades later looking back at this, when it came to the suspension of Ray Zellars, it makes you scratch your head and say, what the Zell? Get your official Jaguar Gear 9 merchandise by going to jj9shop.com, and be sure to like and subscribe, as it really helps the channel out a lot. Join me every Wednesday night where we'll play NFL Trivia for cash prizes at 9 p.m. Eastern over on Twitch. To learn more about the history of college football, subscribe to Jaguar Gator 8. To learn more about the history of Major League Baseball, subscribe to Jaguar Gator 7. Also, special thanks to all of our Patreon supporters for helping out the channel. Your support is greatly appreciated. See how you can become a patron and request future video topics in the description below.